So, the process of this film being made took a very long time. From 2012 to 2014 was the writing process that I said, where we went through Dark Elephant to One More Question to an Unwelcome Guest and Unbreakable Chain, and then eventually Afraid to Speak. So this thing has had 5 titles. And then since we shot it in 2014, the summer of 2014, then finished it up a little bit after that. It's been 6 years of this recording, almost to the day actually. 6 years that we've had this film, and we've been working on this film. So the big question is, why did it take so long for this film to come out publicly? And that is an intense question with an intense answer. So I mentioned earlier about scene 75 when I talked about how the monologue from Nolan was the hardest and easiest thing I've ever written because it came from within. It was very much a POV of me and writing down the words that I wish I could have said in real life, which I still have trouble saying, but it was just a very hard thing to write, but also easy because it was all genuine and true. So, why did this film take 6 years to come out in a way where everybody had access to it? There were no hurdles to jump through. There was nothing you needed to subscribe to. Why did it take this long for it to become available for everybody? There's a double-edged sword when you write about something so personal to you. For me, it's very important. I over the years have found out that a lot of my writing and a lot of my films are based in fear. They're based on fears that I have. So Afraid to Speak being, hey, the fear of talking about something very specific. The Last Divide was the fear about not knowing where a loved one is in very dangerous circumstances. I've noticed that I like to write about fear, and I like to jump into my own head, but also create characters that aren't me or anywhere near me, and see how they would react. So a lot of the core ideas come from maybe fears I have, but then I manipulate them and sort of throw everything at them to see what happens in the end with these ideas. My biggest feeling and my biggest fear with Afraid to Speak on a public platform, in terms of my family would have access to it, my friends would have access to it, everybody that I knew would have access to it, everybody in the world would have access to it if it was public. My biggest struggle and my biggest fear with this was that if I put it out, I would have to confront it, and I would have to admit a lot of things that I think I may have played down over the years. Even now, even now I struggle with this. So I'm going to try my hardest to not be a hypocrite and not be afraid to speak. I deal with this in a very major way. This film did not come from a place of fantasy. This film did not come from a place of I'm making this up as we go, and then we'll see sort of where the story goes. This story came from a deep, deep personal feeling and struggle that I was having, that I am having. Once the film became real, once the story was done, once the editing was done, once the film was, for the most part, finished, although over the years it has been fixed and all that, I put every hurdle in my way to, without knowing, at least consciously knowing, to slow down the process of putting this film out, because I knew that the second I did, I would have to admit, yeah, I'm dealing with this. What you see in the film came from a place of understanding, a place of experience, a place of real life fight. And I thought as Nolan does within the film. I thought that there was a judgment with admitting that this was the case. I felt like there was an admission of weakness. If this film came out and I had to confront this idea that this is me, that was hard to get through. That was hard to confront. That's still hard now. to look at this and say, I made a film that was about me. And it's about a man dealing with depression and having a very hard time talking about that. And then for years, having that same problem in the most ironic way possible, where I think I slowed down the process of this film being completely finished and completely public because I was scared to confront that idea that if it's out, and now I have to admit it. But what I found out, which fuels the irony of this entire scenario, is that the more I discussed this and the more I talked about it, the more I understood that the people out there deal with the same thing. The more I understood that people are willing to talk about this judgmental mindset is not as rampant as I thought it was, and people are willing to listen. Not everybody understands it, and I get that, and I know that there's a lot of information that just isn't quite out there yet in a way for everybody to universally understand what depression is. You break an arm, you understand. The bone inside is broken. But how do you look at somebody, explain, hey, I struggle waking up in the morning. I struggle getting out of bed in the morning. I struggle convincing myself that me as a human being has any worth. I struggle with feeling like a burden to everybody that I cross paths with, family, friends, strangers, anybody. I feel like I am weak because I'm dealing with this thing called depression. And all those factors lined up have made it incredibly hard to put this film out in a public way. But all in all, I also realize that the more I talk about this, the more I see support, the more I see understanding, the more I see people willing to understand it more and want to confront it more and help people with it. And over time, I've realized how important this conversation is. And by not releasing it and not being able to look past, my own personal struggles and being able to look at this on a broader stroke, looking past all that, I realize how important a story like this is. And this isn't sort of me stroking my own ego saying that I wrote the perfect film. I didn't. I'm not saying I directed it perfectly. I didn't. But the story that we created, the film that we have made, is highly important to the progression and the discussion of what is such a hugely important thing that is hurting so many people. And I think allowing us to discuss this and not being afraid to speak is only going to help the bigger picture of this discussion and what mental illness is. And the more people see stories like these coming from somebody who is dealing with it on a personal level, the people are going to be able to support those dealing with this, and hopefully we can open this up to lessening the pain, not having people feel so alone, not having people feel like they are the only one dealing with this and that they have nowhere to turn. And I think that's crucially important to share. Do I regret it taking this long? Yes. It's one of my biggest regrets of my career. It's one of the biggest regrets of my life, and it's something that I thought about every single day leading up to this moment. But it was hard to get past my own wall, and it was hard to break through my own Sam to understand that this was incredibly important and this needed to come out. Because if one single person sees this and it helps them either understand this a little more or help somebody directly dealing with it understand their own strength and allows them to believe the truth, which is that they're not weak, they're incredibly strong, and most importantly that they're not alone, then that just makes all the work worth it. And it makes this film completely worth it. And the best thing is that that's already happened. And now it can happen all over again. And hopefully more people can see it, more people can understand it, and we can push forward even more to understanding this thing that is very, very hard. Very hard. Yeah.